welcome back. It's Tuesday. I hope you enjoyed the videos from yesterday and stuff. And yes, it's the same shirt because I do a whole bunch of videos all at the same time. So probably all of your videos in history will be done today. Today's Friday, just in case you're curious. And so what I'm going to do now is we're going to move into 9/11. 9/11 changed our society forever. Okay. Before 9/11, for example, you could walk your mom, dad, brother, sister, friend, cousin to the actual gate where they got on the plane, and you could wave to the plane, goodbye, plane, goodbye. Okay. After 9/11, no. Okay. Before 9/11, there was no such thing as Homeland Security. Okay. There was no Department of Homeland Security. 9/11 is now where we get Department of Homeland Security. They are the TSA. There was no TSA. There was security, but you would just put your bags on a thing on the conveyor belt like you do now. It would go through the X-ray like it does now, and then you would just walk through a metal detector. There wasn't any, let's get an X-ray under here or anything like that. Okay. And in fact, before 9/11, you were allowed to take a knife on the airplane, which I always thought was crazy, but you could up to 4 inches. Up to a 4-inch knife could be brought on the airplane, like in your pocket, yeah, in your carry-on bag or whatever. It was not a big deal. Now you can't even bring shampoo or soap or yeah. So it's really changed everything. You didn't have to show up at the airport, 2 hours ahead of time. If you showed up within 20 minutes of your airplane leaving, that's all you needed. Parking used to be right at the airport. You could pick up your rental car right at the airport. You didn't have to get in a train or a bus or a shuttle to go get your rental car somewhere off the airport. Those are just a few of the things that changed. Okay, so before 9/11, there were hijackings of aircraft. And everybody always said if there's a hijacking, all you do is you sit, you cooperate, you'll be fine. They'll land, they'll give their demands, they'll get their demands, and they'll let you go. Okay, so the first 3 planes that were hijacked that day, that's why everybody just kind of sat there. Okay, so what I am going to start out with today is to read this really interesting thing that is in my book about the providence of God. I read it, I thought it was really great, and I wanted to share it with you. So here we go. Okay, God's providence and September 11th. Confronting the horrible events of September 11th, 2001, many Americans ask why it had happened. On one level, the answer is that evil men, motivated by false religion, chose to attack the United States. But the question for the Christian is deeper because God rules over all that happens. Not even sin happens if God does not choose to permit it. Genesis 45, 5-8. The Bible reveals that God has purposes for good even in permitting evil. Genesis 50, 20. Genesis 50, 20. Often it is important to discern these reasons without special revelation. Nevertheless, Luke 13, 1-5 provides an answer that can be applied to the September 11th attacks. In this passage, Jesus instructs his listeners about how to respond to 2 disasters that had occurred. Jesus said they should not conclude that the people who suffered in these disasters were worse sinners than themselves. Instead, the listener should realize that death is the consequence of all sinners face. Disasters should cause people to realize that they must repent of their sins and turn to Christ. God may have had many purposes for allowing the September 11th tragedy, but surely one of them was to cause people to reflect on their need for salvation. So, just so you know, after September 11th, the churches were packed. People, there was more people going to church after September 11th than I think I had seen in my life. People were looking for answers. People were looking for God. People were looking for comfort. People were scared. Okay. And so they turned to God, which is exactly where they should have turned. After a few years, people forgot about 9/11, and yeah, now we have coronavirus and we close all the churches, which is very interesting. But that's what we did. All right. So I am going to tell you my story about September 11th. And your assignment is to ask your parents. You can pick either parent and ask them to tell you their story about September 11th. Okay? So, September 11th, 2001, I was at home with my two younger kids. I had dropped off my older son at high school. That's kind of important later. And we were sitting there, and my dad was at work, and he called because I lived with my parents. My husband and I and my kids all lived with my mom and my dad. We all lived in the same house together. And he said, "Turn on the TV." So we turned on the TV and we sat and we watched. And the the North Tower was already burning at that time, and the people were discussing if this was an accident, if it was on purpose, what was happening, and they had cameras pointed at them at that time. And while the cameras were there, you saw this airplane come in and hit the other tower. Um, so later in the day, I would find out that the first tower uh, was an American Airlines plane, Flight 11, out of Boston, Massachusetts. And that my son's brand new friend that he had been going to school for like a week. His dad was the co pilot on Flight 11. His name is Thomas McGinnis. He is a Christian man. Well, he was a Christian man, and he was the co-pilot on that first flight that hit the Northern Tower. So at the time that I'm looking at this in my mom's room, I did not know that. So the second tower comes in. We're watching, and then pretty soon they talk about the Pentagon, that something has hit the Pentagon. And they show, and there's a mound of smoke coming out from the Pentagon, and then they go back to the World Trade Center. And the South Tower, I'm watching it, and it's doing like these kind of little weird things, and I'm thinking to myself, doesn't anybody else see this? How come they're not saying get out, get out, get out? But all the reporters and everybody didn't seem to notice, and then all of a sudden the tower fell. And then the second tower falls a little later. And it's chaos and mayhem. Nobody knows who's doing what. The FAA is trying to bring down the planes out of the sky. We don't know how many are hijacked. At some reports, they said as many as 20 airplanes were hijacked. They said none of the planes were hijacked. They said they actually accused the pilots of American Flight 11 of one of them being suicidal. I mean, it was chaos. It really was. Um, so we watched all this coverage, and I went to go get my son to pick him up. And the principal stops my car because we have a pickup line like we do at Calvary. So we have a pickup line. So he stops my car and he says that Daniel's friend, Tommy McGinnis, he was named after his dad, yeah. His name was Tommy McGinnis. I said, "Oh yeah, I know Tommy." He said, his dad was a pilot on the American flight, and all the kids were super devastated, And so it was kind of interesting because when I was at home, I was thinking, do I know anybody in New York City? No. Do I know anybody that works at the Pentagon? No. Do I know anybody who, was flying today? No. So I figured, okay, I don't know anybody involved. So it was kind of a big shocker when Principal Lukianovic told me that Daniel's friend, his dad, was on the plane. And so that was tough. His mom actually ends up going and talking in churches and sharing her story about that day and about how God sustained them and about how God gave them comfort in that time. And I know, Mr. McGinnis is in heaven with God, and it's just a really sad thing that happened. And I know he's not the only one. There were other Christians that day that ended up being with the Lord. But it's kind of, a hard thing to think about to do. So we went to Tom McGinnis's funeral, and there was a lot of media and stuff, and um, so there were a lot of phone calls. It was not to my house, but like to the school and reporters, and it was in those ways it was pretty difficult because this poor family has lost their dad, their husband, and all these reporters are running around trying to talk to everybody. What did you know? Who did you know? And the Boston airport people were devastated because that flight, actually two of the flights, came out of Logan Airport, Boston. And so they were just a mess because they had let these guys get on. They actually flew out of Portland, Maine, and then into Boston, and then out of Boston onto the flight that was supposed to be going to California. And so it was a tough time. So I would like you to please speak with your family members, and they can tell you where they were in their experience of 9/11. Okay? All right, so two planes hit 9/11. One of them, American Airlines Flight 11, hits the North Tower first, and then an hour later, I think that was a United flight, hit the South Tower, and then the flight hits 30 minutes after that, the flight hits the Pentagon. Now that was a mess up with airlines and stuff because basically all the hijackers were supposed to hit at the same time, but there were flight delays and stuff like there are now, and so the last flight in the air was United 93, and um, they were calling their families. See, none of the other plane people called the families because they did what they were told, which was to be quiet, cooperate, and everybody would be fine. So this flight, though, they started calling their families and saying, hey, I'm on a hijacked flight. Well, because all the other planes had hit buildings, their family members were saying, hey, we know what's happening. Your plane is going to hit a building. There's already been 3. And so what the passengers on that flight end up doing is they're like, you know what, we're going to die either way. So we're going to try to save other people. And maybe we can come out of this alive. And so they got together and they developed this whole plan to take back the plane. They even had a pilot that was on board that could fly it if they could get him into the cockpit. And so as they start trying to take over the plane, the hijacker drives the plane into the ground in Pennsylvania. There are a lot of heroes on that flight as they tried their best. Nobody knows what that airplane was supposed to hit. Even today, almost 20 years later, nobody knows where that airplane was supposed to hit. Some say the Capitol, some say the White House, some say the Supreme Court. Nobody actually knows. So for days, you airlines were shut down and stuff. But President Bush came on and said, don't let the terrorists win. Go to the mall, go shopping, go along with your normal life, because the point of terrorism is to make you change your life, which kind of, coronavirus. All right, so I'm going to have you watch the address that he did on 9/11. I'm going to have you watch his speech from Ground Zero where he says, I can't hear you, but they'll hear from us. It's that one is a C-SPAN and it's long, so I'll just tell you where to do it. All right. So the group that was responsible, which we finally found out, was Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda is a group of terrorists, and this was not their first attack on American soil or American interests. So in 1993, they sent a truck bomb. This was when President Clinton was in office. They sent a truck bomb into the parking structure underneath the World Trade Center. That's what the Twin Towers are, it's a World Trade Center. And it blew up. So then they had protocol that when stuff like that happens, everybody evacuates. And that's what they did on 9/11 too. Everybody evacuated, but they sent everybody back into the South Tower, which was a problem because then the other plane came an hour later. Bill Clinton knew it was Osama bin Laden, so he did a speech where he said, "You shouldn't do that. That was very bad." So that's what happened. In 1998, Al Qaeda attacked 2 U.S. embassies, one in Kenya and one in Tanzania. And the way the embassies work is the embassy is considered American soil or Russian soil or French soil, depending on the embassy. Yes, a Russian embassy or a French embassy or American embassy. So they kind of attacked us then on our embassy soil, if that makes sense. They overran the embassies. None of the ambassadors were killed or anything. They got them all out. So that was good. The Marines did their job. In 2000, there was a ship, the USS Cole. I actually remember seeing this one too. And it was anchored off of Yemen. They had come into port, and this boat got really close to them. Closer than I think they probably should have let it, and then they blew a hole in the side of the ship, and a lot of sailors were killed in that explosion. Okay. I already talked to you about it changing flight forever. So some of the other things that came out of 9/11 was something called the Patriot Act. So the Patriot Act basically let the U.S. government listen to anybody's conversation for any reason without any restrictions. And there were other things. They could follow money now. They could do a lot of things that kind of went against a lot of the civil rights, kind of like is happening now. So the Supreme Court ruled that some of it was unconstitutional, and so they had to change some of it, and others they kept intact. So, like, one of them was they could arrest you if they thought you were a terrorist and never charge you and never have you call a lawyer, and basically you went into, like, nowhere. So that was kind of a scary thing. Okay? So, once we have discovered that it's Al Qaeda and it's Osama bin Laden, we know from intelligence that he was training people in Afghanistan to carry out these terrorist attacks. And so on October 2nd, 2000, we began bombing Afghanistan. We don't do it by ourselves. We go to the UN. The UN gets together a coalition. And so it's not just America. It's America and it's England and France and Spain and, a whole bunch of other countries. Canada, I think, was even in on it too. So they start bombing. Bombing's never enough. So they send troops in to take over that area. Afghanistan is a really war-torn country. That poor place has been overrun by every country you can think of. No country has ever won there. They always just kind of fight to a stalemate or lose. Russia tried to take Afghanistan. Britain tried to take Afghanistan earlier in history, not at this time in history. So they really don't trust anybody. And America went in one time and then left them, and things were worse than it was before. So they were very leery about trusting us. And as it went on, they saw that we were there to help, and they became more trusting. We actually still have people in Afghanistan today. So I know President Obama tried to get everybody out, but I'm pretty sure there's still a group of people there. Not as many as during the war, obviously, but there is still a group of people there. In 2005, that's when the support for Afghanistan started to change because the people said, "Oh, hey, you guys are here to help us." Okay. Um, so that's one front. On another front, in 2002, we go into Iraq. Okay, and that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. We're going to talk about the second Gulf War, some people call it, the invasion of Iraq, or the capture of Osama bin Laden. Saddam Hussein. Wrong guy. Saddam Hussein, fun story. The United States put him in power. So there was a problem. I don't remember when. The 80s, maybe? I can't remember. But the guy who was in charge at the time was an enemy of the United States. So the United States did some finagling and put Saddam Hussein in charge of Iraq. We don't pick him very well, I'll just tell you. And then he went rogue, and he killed lots of people. He was a very bad man. He used weapons, gas warfare, and stuff on a group called the Kurds right after the first Gulf War in 1991. And he mustard gassed them and killed a whole bunch of Kurds. People would disappear who came up against Saddam Hussein. He was just a bad dude, like Hitler, Stalin, bad dude. And so he allows terrorists in his country to train, and part of um, of his surrender during the first Gulf War in 91 is that he has to allow inspectors to come in and look for weapons of mass destruction like the mustard gas that he used on the Kurds. And from day one, I'm not joking, 1992, he started going, "No, we're not going to do that. Nope, can't do that. Nope, can't do that. Nope, can't do that." And so all through George Bush's presidency, all through Clinton's presidency, Saddam Hussein would not let inspectors in. He would not agree to the terms of surrender from that first war. So this is kind of a carryover from that. And we'll talk more about that tomorrow because I want to leave you plenty of time. Remember, history is a 45-minute slot, guys. So yes, we're at like 23 minutes for the video, and you need to watch the other videos, okay? So, and there will be, I want you to summarize, I want you to do the assignment, talk to your parents, write up what they remember, pick one, pick two, however you want to do it, and then submit it to Google Classroom, okay? And I will see you tomorrow. Bye.